Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for this episode of CCU's Tech Training. The next couple episodes are going to be the whiteboard sessions where we just we zoom in on specific aspects of what we do here at CCU and talk about some things a little more in depth. Talk about the big questions that surround each area and then dive into answering them. So here we go. So these first couple videos, we're going to dive into audio somewhat and talk a little bit about the different sections of the console on the X32 that you'll find. The first thing that I want to start with is compression, of a huge tool to be used by audio technicians everywhere, and but also it can be a huge hindrance if you're not exactly sure what a compressor does or how to use it normally. So compressor, right off the top. What does a compressor do? You've probably heard me ask this question, and I always define it with this answer. A compressor limits the dynamic range of an instrument, and that is any input. So we're talking microphones, line stuff, anything at all, anything from a DI box, all of the above. So what does limiting the dynamic range mean? So you guys went to high school, I presume, so I'm sure you had mathematics, which means you probably know what range is. Range is simply the maximum minus the minimum. I don't know why I paused so long there. It's been a while since I've been in high school, I guess. But anyways, so if you think about it, you think about the maximum possible input, the maximum loudness of an instrument versus the minimum loudness of an instrument, and you subtract the minimum from the maximum, that is the dynamic range. So if you think about it, most instruments have a huge dynamic range. If you think about a piano, think about how gently you can play one note and about how incredibly loud you can play a massive chord. Similarly, an electric guitar, how quiet it can be versus how loud it can be. I mean, the dynamic range is huge, and from a mixing standpoint, it can be very difficult when you're trying to control that using a fader that's only has like 5 inches of play. So a compressor takes that and minimizes or slightly reduces the size of that dynamic range so it's easier to mix. If you ever see a compressor on the X32, if you hit the view button in the bottom right hand corner of the dynamics section, you'll see a graph, and it looks something like this. And all this graph is simply a graphical visual representation of the input and output of the signal that's coming into that console. So if you think about it, if input is down here and we have out over here, we're going to have a linear relationship between the two, because if we have 5 decibels in, we're going to have 5 decibels out. If we have 10 decibels in, we're going to have 10 decibels out. That makes sense. But basically what a compressor does is it knees off the top end of an input signal and squishes the dynamic range. So I pick what's called a threshold, which is basically an input level, and at that level the compressor then adds a ratio or starts taking away decibels based on a ratio. So the two main controls on a compressor are threshold and ratio. Ratio is simply, it occurs in a blank to 1 kind of format. So 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 10 to 1, infinity to 1. Threshold is simply a number where the compressor starts working. So ratio, if you think about it as a whole, you say, okay, threshold, once my input hits 10 decibels, I want to start affecting the signal at a 3 to 1 ratio. So that means once I hit threshold, all of the input that comes in after that, say I'm at a 5 to 1 ratio and I have 10 decibels above the threshold coming in. If I'm at a 5 to 1 ratio, instead of 10 decibels going out above that, I'm only going to have 2 decibels going out, because for every 5 that come in, the compressor is only letting 1 out, if that makes sense to you. So let's think about specific instances. So say you have a vocal and they're pretty quiet through the whole song, and then they hit this huge chorus and she starts like screaming into the microphone, and you have to gain up the mic somewhat in the beginning because she's so quiet. You need help just to be able to get a decent level in the ears and through the mains. But when she starts screaming, she's clipping the mic and you don't know what to do. What you could do is add a compressor, and that would really just knee off the top of the signal, allowing you to keep the gain up for the more quiet sections of the song and not clip the channel later on. So that is squishing the dynamic range. So just so we know, threshold, just to reiterate, where the compressor starts working. Ratio is kind of how hard the compressor is working. And just quickly, the other things that you'll find on the compressor on the X32 are going to be your attack, release, and then makeup gain. So we're going to talk about those a little bit more in the next section of this video, but that's all for right now. If you have any questions, be sure to shoot me a message at tanner.daniels@ccuuniversity.edu. I hope you learned a little something about compressors today.